All right. So again, welcome everyone. My name is Samantha Thompson. I'm an energy equity partner. I will be facilitating today's meeting. Again, this is our Learning Lab number 6 for our newcomers. Welcome, and for our returning lab participants, again, welcome, and thanks for being here. For those that don't know, our Learning Labs are a public meeting space where all folks are welcome to participate. We elicit feedback in this space. We inform you all and have discussions about what we're doing at the utility, specifically on the sustainability and resource planning team. We may hit other groups and plans that we have going on, but mainly focus on resource planning. Also, it's a small but mighty group, so we really appreciate you being here. The intention of the Learning Labs is to really foster an environment where we are doing community engagement and eliciting feedback from you all so we can have it to help inform, hopefully, our future plans. Next slide, please. All right, so as for our meeting logistics, as you can see on the left-hand side, you'll see the icon, and then on the right-hand side, you'll see the description. Most folks are muted upon entry, so if you want to turn up volume, that's the icon for your audio. Again, that microphone with the slash in it, everyone is probably muted at this time, but if you'd like to come off mute, if you have a question, that is the icon you will use. We encourage folks to use the chat feature, so you can do direct messages to other participants if you know them and you want to chat them, or if you have a question for the whole group, for everyone participating in the lab, feel free to use the chat box. We will be monitoring it. You can use that to make comments or ask questions. We have the video feature. If you'd like to come off camera, you can. I know sometimes we have bandwidth challenges depending on how many participants are in the room. So if you want to come off camera, you're free to do so, but it's not required. If you want to just come off camera, if you have a question, that's helpful. We always welcome seeing folks' faces. We will be utilizing the raise hand feature. You can see that down below on the right-hand side with the reaction. That's where you would raise your hand. We use the raise hand feature just to ensure that we're calling on people and we're not interrupting folks, or if they're presenting or somebody is completing a thought. So please use the raise hand feature. And also you can enable closed caption if that is helpful to you. And then we also, if you have any technical issues, we have Joe Boyles. His name is Joe Boyles, IT guy. So if you're having challenges, he can take you to a breakout room to help troubleshoot and then bring you back into the space. Next slide, please. So in our Learning Labs, we developed and we use operating agreements. The purpose of the operating agreements is to establish norms with our community and to create a safe space. And we really, really encourage folks to honor these operating agreements. We're in a space where we're learning, and so we want folks to practice curiosity and seek to understand different perspectives. So some of our operating agreements are to stay engaged. So it's easy to check out when we're not maybe as interested in a topic, or we may not agree, but we ask folks to stay engaged. I will give the caveat, if you need to take a break at any time, please feel free to do so, but just when you return, just be fully engaged. Be willing to experience some discomfort. What we mean here is that sometimes topics may be challenging, and maybe folks don't have the same point of view as you, or just being willing to sit in that discomfort, because when we kind of are uncomfortable, that's where the growth and change happens. We ask folks to speak your truth, but know that it is one part of a larger story. So if you are speaking your truth, use your name and your story. We ask that you refrain from using specific names of others if you're speaking on their behalf, so being more general. But if you want to speak your own lived experience, we really welcome that in this space, as it is really important. Expect and accept non-closure. Sometimes we have a heavy agenda, or really sometimes technical topics, and we may not be able to move through everything. We may not be able to find a solution today. So just knowing that, just to manage some expectations, to accept non-closure. That is always a mouthful to say. And then we ask folks to share airtime. So we want to give everyone the opportunity to voice and share their perspective or ask questions. If we notice as the facilitator that some folks may be taking up more space, I will prioritize other voices that haven't been heard. So know that it's not personal. We're just trying to create a more equitable environment for folks to share. So we will ask if folks agree. You can go to the bottom right-hand icon that says reaction. If you agree to our operating agreements, we would love to see a thumbs up. So I'm going to demo. I'm going to put my thumb up that I agree. And I see some thumbs up. Thanks. Okay, let's get into our next slide. So why you're here, that's important. Why you want to know why you're here. So today we're going to be sharing some updates on our plans and engagement. And we'll also have an update on our community benefits and impact advisory group. In the second part of our presentation, or our lab, I should say, we'll have our presenter, Jason Salmi-Klotz, kind of doing an intro to our flex load. And if you don't know what flex load is and what that means, stay tuned. We will get into that. So and I do want to also welcome, if you have a question, please use the chat or raise your hand. Again, this is a community of learning. So if you're like, I don't know what flex load means, or I don't know what this acronym means, please use the chat. And then we'll have a Q&A regarding our CEP and IRP filing, if you've been following that. And then we will share some timelines and next steps. So hopefully that sounds good to everyone. Here's the agenda. I'm not going to fully walk through it, but as you see, we're at the welcome stage, and then we'll get into what we were saying, why you're here, some updates, flex load, and the office hours for the IRP and CEP and closing remarks. So these are the timestamps. So if you're like, I need to go make breakfast, coffee, and you're like, I don't really want to stay for that, feel free to come check in or check out at any time. Okay. All right. So today I'm actually a presenter. So again, my name is Samantha Thompson. I go by she, her. I use she, her pronouns. Again, I'm an energy equity partner. And what that means, it's a hybrid role of diversity, equity, inclusion, and community engagement. I help lead our engagement for all our plans, which I'll get into for my group. I do want to make an announcement that Angela Long, if you all were familiar, she was our distribution system planning manager. She has moved on from PGE, so she's no longer here, but we want to thank her for all her lovely and helpful contributions at PGE. And if you know her, you can feel free to reach out to her directly or on her LinkedIn, but I wanted to provide that update in the spirit of transparency. So, and introduce our new manager. So for this team who kind of runs and operates the learning labs, our new manager is Jason Salmi-Klotz. He is wonderful. You will see him later presenting on the flex load. So he is also available if folks have questions, and just wanted to share that. Sorry, let me backpedal. I forgot on my note. I noticed we have some folks from staff from the OPUC, which is the Oregon Public Utility. I wanted to give a moment if Nate Sayin had anything you wanted to add as you are the distribution system planning, if you have any updates, not to put you on the spot. I know you maybe weren't planning, but just wanted to give you the opportunity if you wanted to provide an update or share anything that you all have upcoming. Maybe he's not in the building, but okay. If not, that's okay. So we'll get into the presentation about the sustainability and strategy and planning resource planning team. Sorry, it's a mouthful. So next slide, please. So this is what the group where I work on as what my team is responsible for. So on our team, we have several folks, and we're all segmented into different responsibilities. under our Senior Director, Kristen Sheeran. So our team is responsible for Portland General Electric's, PGE's, corporate strategy. We also produce the report of the ESG, which is the Environmental, Social, and Governance report. This team is also responsible for the Integrated Resource Plan and the Clean Energy Plan, the Distribution System Plan, Flex Load, multi-year plan, and the Transportation Electrification Plan. So if you will be attending future learning labs, you will probably be learning about one of these or many of these subjects and areas. So next slide, please. That's just a list. And then here is a visual of just some of the plans that we produce and report on our team. You can find this on our webpage under our resource planning, which will be shared in the deck and also at the end of the presentation. And this just kind of walks through like what the plans are. So for our distribution system plan, we filed part 2 last August. This plan assesses our distribution needs. This is where the learning labs were born. We had community workshops. So it's really important for us. That's where we were eliciting feedback from you all, if you are a part of that process, and how it helps inform future planning. Then we have our IRP CEP, which was filed just this past March. We are in the comment period, so you can feel free to read up on that and take a look if you like. They are very lengthy documents, but they are segmented out very nicely. You can get a lot from an executive summary or go to the chapters that you're most interested in. Then we have our transportation electrification plan, where we just filed our draft filing in June of this year. And most of these plans happen, I believe, every 2 years. That's kind of the cadence. Except for the ESG report that comes out annually, which showcases our commitments to sustainability. And it includes things like our DEI and stewardship. So you can always feel free to look at that. And then our multi-year plan evaluates our flex load, which Jason will get into more. And then again, so next slide. So when we talk about people-centered planning, that is the work that we are doing for our engagement. It's an essential component in all of our, and working with our community partners. So that's you all. The Oregon Public Utility Commission has expectations for us to evolve with the community in a public process. That's what this is, and develop and elicit public input from you all. And we're really pushing that because historically the utilities have not had to do this. And a lot of voices were left out of the conversation, especially those who have been historically excluded, which includes the environmental justice community, which is BIPOC, rural, youth, seniors, those who have been impacted negatively from a decision or infrastructure issues. So a lot of our focus is targeting environmental justice communities, but all are welcome to participate in one of our 2 platforms. And so the Learning Lab, which you're here today, is our non-technical, more introductory level. Still can have a lot of technical components because that's the utility, but we're really making a concerted effort, and we hear you. Some of the feedback we got is to distill down the information. So we are building a strategy right now and looking into ways to distill down this information and make it more lay. We would love to have your feedback at the end of this learning lab. So we have a feedback form, or you can email us. That really helps us. We really do read every comment or question or feedback. And then we have our technical venue, which is our roundtables, which mostly discuss the integrated resource plan. Usually that group comprises mostly of individuals, some nonprofits that represent climate justice, and developers. It is more technical. So we saw a need when we were doing our distribution system planning to kind of separate the 2, and it's been really helpful for folks. Next slide, please. So here is just kind of some information about our learning labs and our one-stop shop. What we heard from some of our community partners is that they wanted one meeting venue to follow what we're doing at PG when it's in regard to our plans, projects, products, process. So we have consolidated the mailing list. That's why we have a mixed group now. So you may have been attending the drag or the flash or the IRP and CEP and the distribution system plan. We have now consolidated this. We want to have more voices. So, and we really want to hear more diverse perspectives on how we're doing. The topics that will be discussed could be various planning initiatives and efforts. Again, you can see it, it's the CEP, IRP. Sometimes we feature our other colleagues' work. Last month, we featured a wildfire team, mitigation planning team, as it was Wildfire Awareness Month in May. So that was great. Folks got to learn more what they're doing. So we really like to use the Learning Lab as a place where folks can learn about all of our planning efforts. The cadence is we are going to pilot and test something new. Typically, we were meeting once a month, but we are finding that we may want to meet every 6 to 8 weeks. So just look out for the calendar invite. It may not be on a monthly basis. We may revisit it if we feel that you all would prefer us to meet monthly, but we're going to try 6 to 8 weeks. This gives us a little more time to coordinate internally and really build and curate content for you all. The time for our learning labs are typically 2 hours. Again, that was based on feedback from our community partners. 2 hours seems like a good middle of the road. They used to be a little bit longer, but we will potentially add a third hour, an additional hour, sorry, not a third hour, an additional hour if we need to at the end of the 2 hour slot for more technical topics. So you will know if we're going to do that, and it'll be included in the meeting invite. And one thing that we're really trying to work on is, and what we do is we always try to send out the agenda in advance if we can. So you can plop in at any time you want if you're just here to see a certain segment, because we know that people's time is valuable. And then below is just, I don't need to walk through step by step, but that's our communication information. That's our new mailbox. So if you want to communicate with us directly, feel free to reach out at learninglab@pgn.com. That's our webpage with all our resource planning, those on the previous slide, if you want to learn more about those. And we are using Zoom and some of the collaboration tools. We're not going to be using them today, but we may use them in the future and use them in the past. Our surveys and Mural, which is a digital whiteboard when we would like to do more interactive engagement. And so I'll move to the next slide, but yeah, just below is just our email communication. Okay, so here's a slide, and I'll just give you all this disclosure. At PG, we love interactive, and sometimes they can seem busy slides, but I wanted to provide an illustration and do some expectation, managing some expectations of what our group does and when it comes to engagement. So in our group, the resource planning group, we've kind of divided this up into 4 phases. And phase 1 is the planning stage. And that's mostly where the learning lab, where you will hear about our plans. And that is where the learning labs kind of live. So when you're coming to a learning lab, this is where you may be informed about something. We may have a discussion. So that's that feedback loop you see. We may ask for feedback, like, what do you all think of this? If we're presenting on something. And then typically we may ask for feedback in the form of an interview, a survey, and maybe in real time of our meeting. So we do look at the chat and use your questions that you're asked. And then we may categorize those and put those in themes. Then we may come up with an action plan, and then we'll follow up with folks in the learning lab. And I just want to say, like, for example, when we did our planning for the clean energy, we had 6 learning lab series dedicated to the clean energy plan. And that's where we were we were doing this feedback loop, discussing things, sharing how we were thinking about things, getting feedback from our community partners and participants. And then we use that information to help write our clean energy plan. And that is where the learning labs happen. And you may go through this feedback loop several times. So I just want folks to know, like, your feedback doesn't go unheard. And we are trying to practice more clarity and show that, and also do better on our feedback loop. So again, in our planning, we may be talking about several different plans within the plan, and there may be several feedback loops that happen. The next phase would be phase 2. Let me give an example, sorry. So in the planning phase, let's say, for instance, we do a non-wire solution, which is an alternative to poles and wires, and it may include something like a battery storage, solar, energy efficiency. So we may plan for that in phase 1. Then when we get that green lit, we've done all the feedback, taken it in, it gets green lit and approved, we'll move to phase 2, which again, we may form a community solutions work group. This would be a dedicated work group working on a specific project or maybe product. So for instance, if we're using the non-wire solution as an example, we would go through this feedback loop with this specific work group. And this is where we would develop and do co-development and design and potentially implement if it gets approved. So if we say, hey, we want to put a non-wire solution, we're going to do battery storage in a certain neighborhood that was in collaboration with PGE and this work group, that's where that would happen. It would happen in phase 2. And then once we get greenlit, again, because there's always process within a phase, and again, we may go through several feedback loop cycles. Once it gets approved, then we move to phase 3, which would be execution and deployment. And that's where we would that's where we would use the learning labs to inform people and provide updates for follow-up. And then the next phase after, let's say, the product and project is finished, we would move to phase 4, which is the reporting phase. And that's where, under that follow-up umbrella, we would inform you of what happened, provide the updates. We'd ask for feedback, how they thought the project went. We would share our lessons learned. We would measure it and measure our outcomes. So I will pause there because I know this is a lot to take in, and I'll just see if there's any questions. Sorry, I wasn't able to monitor the chat as I'm presenting, but that's kind of the 4 phases. And then the bottom salmon color is the long-term engagement. And that's the work that I do. My colleague Jen Latu, Shadia, we will be going through every step of each phase. Most people on my team stick in the planning. They may kind of go in the development phase, but most of them are sticking in the planning phase. So I'll pause there. I don't know if somebody has eyes. Let's see if there are any questions. I can pause. And if it's a lot to take in, feel free to email me. You can email the Learning Lab and we can go more in detail, or if a question comes up later, feel free to reach out. So that was just kind of a quick high level of what the team does. And now, if there aren't any questions, and I'm checking the chat, I don't see any at this time, I will kick it over to our next presenter, Jen Latu, who is our diversity, equity, inclusion, our principal diversity, equity, inclusion consultant. She is the program manager for our Community Benefits and Impacts Advisory Group, and she is going to provide an update.
Thanks, Samantha. Hi, all. My name is Jen Latu. As Samantha introduced, I use she, her pronouns. I sit in PGE's diversity Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and I work across the organization. I am also the program manager, as she mentioned, for the Community Benefits and Impacts Advisory Group, which I'm going to provide an update about some kind of context level setting and an update about, I guess, what's important. Samantha and I work very closely together, as well as with Shadia and others across the organization. And what my goal usually is to ensure alignment and coordination around equitable outreach and engagement. Today, I want to, as I said, I want to share do a level set for folks that maybe haven't heard this information or this is new information to them, as well as provide an update for those who have been in conversations or have heard some of the previous information about our CBIAG. So some of these slides might be familiar, just transparently. The talking points are slightly different because we are in a different place. So with that, as a reminder, the Community Benefits and Impacts Advisory Group, which we often call our CBIAG, was born out of legislation, specifically House Bill 2021, the Clean Energy Bill. So, the emission goals, the Clean Energy Plan, those were all born out of 2021, as well as the requirement for electric utilities to stand up and convene a Community Benefits and Impacts Advisory Group. I think the thing that I want to point out in this slide that is important for folks to kind of level set and understand is the who, and who meaning who will make up the group. And so earlier, Samantha mentioned a focus on environmental justice communities, and that is true in the advisory group as well. And the other piece is the biennial report, which is focused on community benefits and impacts, and is to be filed with our regulator, the Oregon Public Utility Commission. The little kind of smaller there is a definition of environmental justice communities, and it is a very broad definition that includes lots of underserved communities. So I won't go into that, but we can move on to the next slide and I can provide a little bit more. So this slide is really PG's approach in standing up our Community Benefits and Impacts Advisory Group. Transparently, this is our first advisory group, and we wanted to be intentional and take a really iterative approach so we could incorporate what we learned along the way. So our phased approach is intended to be that way so that we could apply our learnings throughout the process of standing it up. And so in phase one, we convened a group that helped inform the recruitment and selection of our inaugural CBIAG. We also kicked off our first meeting in April, which kind of put us into our phase two. And that's where we currently are. And really the focus for this phase is to build awareness and knowledge of energy and utility concepts and to build community within the group. So I'll talk about it a little bit more later, what that looks like in terms of our meetings. But kind of the next phase is really later this year, after we kind of go through the process, which really is the first 6 months of that awareness and knowledge building around energy and utility concepts. And we start to bring forth topics that are identified in the legislation to the group for advisory, with opportunities for advisory, excuse me. The other thing is to note is that we are going to file the timeline for the biennial report is within 2 years of kicking off our CBIAG. And so at that point, we kicked off our CBIAG this year, April. So 2 years from then, we would have to file a report. With that being said, I think the other piece that is important is we have a third-party facilitator that is actually facilitating these meetings and being the in-between between PGE and this community group. And we're working very closely with them on that. If there are any questions, I'm sorry, I forgot to say this earlier. If there are any questions that come up in this, in the chat or anything, if Samantha or Shadia or whomever can let me know, that'd be great. We can move to the next slide. So these are our goals and outcomes for the CBIAG. So kind of our program goals. First, to make sure that we have an equitable and inclusive forum where we can gain insight and feedback on specific topics. And we hope to, through that, achieve a centering of community voices. The other being that we really see the CBIAG as a layer of consideration, which is often what an equity lens will do. And so it provides an equity lens on some focused areas, and that information to be compiled and then put into that biennial report that I just spoke of. And then finally, We recognize that energy and utilities are complex and that unpacking how we operate and make decisions is really a vital foundation for folks to get into this clean energy transition and understand where they want to operate, what makes the most sense, where they can get the most value in engaging with us and participating in it. And so we're really committed to providing information to increase that awareness and understanding. And also, as Samantha mentioned earlier, engagement is always throughout every process for us. And so that long-term engagement where there is mutual benefit is really important to us. We can go to the next slide. These are the topic areas, a summary of the topic areas that are mentioned in the legislation around the CBIAG. We will bring forth all of the must topics, but there is a lot of crossover with the may topics that are listed on the bottom half of the slide. So we'll likely bring a lot of that information into the group as well. These topics are really our framing for content that is shared with the the advisory that we will seek from the group. We can move to the next slide. So in terms of who, I think this is more of the where we are since the last time there may have been an update to some of the folks that are participating in this meeting today or have heard other information is we currently have 12 of our 15 seats filled, and we have one in the process that will likely be joining in our next meeting. Our strategy for recruitment was to conduct really focused outreach with the goal of diverse representation, both from individuals representing organizations as well as organizations and who they serve. So, and a lot of that including community-based, community serving, and culturally specific organizations. So kind of with that, these are our current members. Just to kind of go through this list, because I think it's important to understand who is showing up and who is speaking on behalf of those that they serve or bringing different perspectives into the room. And so the first being Sabrina Wilson from Rosewood Initiative, which serves Black and Brown folks in East Portland. Lorena Carrillo from El Programa Hispanico, which serves the Latina community in Gresham. Sherry Vilmark, which from Community Energy Project, which they serve low-income folks, providing community education, supplies, direct home energy upgrades, and doing repairs. John Magdalena from SEI, Self-Enhancement Inc. They provide resources for youth and families, for African Americans and others living in poverty, and they are located in Portland, but they also are distributing energy assistance. They are one of the distributors of energy assistance at Multnomah County for us. MFS, Ebony Foreman, MFS is focused on serving youth, family, and older adults through their early childhood development. They have community-based health and wellness programs, as well as family economic well-being programs. APICO, so Christine from APICO, they're a culturally specific organization that provides opportunities for youth to gain entry to advocacy through civic leadership development. And then we have Meg from Farm Worker Housing Development, where both farm worker housing development and Capaces, which is below that, and that includes Jules, serve the Mid-Willamette Valley. They both also serve farm workers and immigrant communities. The difference being is FHDC is focused on housing development and low income and workforce housing, whereas Capaces has a number of programs, including the civic leadership program, community education, workforce building, community health, and some others. Also, we have Timur, who from the Slavic community of Northwest, where they provide education, employment, health, and wellness, and other services to the Slavic community. And then NAMAC, we have Nate from NAMAC on there, where NAMAC is focused on education and technical assistance, also the relationship and community building and business support for a lot of communities of people who identify as people of color, including Black, African American, Latino, Native American, Indigenous, Asian, and Pacific Islander. We also have MAC from IRCO, where they serve immigrant and refugee families, and they have a broad programming and supports for different specific cultural groups within that. And then finally, we have Samantha from the Hispanic Chamber, where they are focused on economic advancement, wealth creation, and I think their bottom line is equity for Latinos in Oregon and Southwest Washington. We are also actively seeking additional representation. One of the seats that we are in the process of filling is for a representative of an organization that serves folks with disabilities. And then we are still actively seeking Native, tribal, Indigenous person representation. So with that being said, that is who is serving currently on our advisory group. And if we want to go to the last slide, the next and last slide for me. So in terms of our meetings, we have monthly meetings on the fourth Wednesday of each month. They are open to the public. However, we are centering the members. So attendees operate in an observer only. In an observer only capacity. And so what that means is that the discussion and the voices that we hear and the participation is between the attendees, the facilitator, and the presenter, excuse me. Our next meeting is June 28th. We have them virtually. They're always from 10 to 12. We hope to have at least one quarterly meeting that has a hybrid option where folks can meet in person, but we're still working on that and gaining everyone's comfortability and availability. Materials, there is an external webpage that will be on Portland General that is in process. And so all materials will be available there, but in the interim, we're sending out that information to attendees. If you want to join the mailing list, meaning you want to know when meetings are, you want to be added to a meeting, you'd like presentation materials in the interim, want to be notified when our website is up, et cetera, you can always email cbiag@pgn.com. With that, if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. If not, you can email us, or I'm sure Samantha and team, if there is any information or any questions that come in through the Learning Lab email, or after I have to hop off this call, will forward over to me, and I'm happy to get back to folks.
Thank you, Jen. I'm checking the chat, but I did want to ask one question. As we are looking and seeking to fill a few more remainder seats, would it be okay for folks if they have a referral potentially to reach out?
Absolutely. I think the CBIAG legislation allows us to compensate folks that are participating in this. And so I do want to be clear about that. So folks that are participating on our advisory group are providing advisory and therefore being compensated for their time and efforts. And if there are any recommendations that folks want to send, they can come directly to the CBIAG. That would be the most, I guess, efficient way to provide that information. But also if something is thought and the folks on this call from PGE can also get that information to us. But yes, I would appreciate that. And we will continue to have that out there in terms of that recruitment. And we'll always actively be recruiting because we do ask for a 2-year commitment on the advisory group, but we also understand that folks may have to roll off sooner. And so we are always open to wanting to make sure we have relationships and folks and understanding who is interested and might be available at some point.
Thanks, Jen. So yes, if you want to help us recruit folks, I heard we're seeking folks who represent the disability community and tribal, indigenous folks. So if you do know someone who may be interested, or if you'd like more information, we can set up a one-on-one meeting with you. You can email at cbiag@pgn.com, or you can feel free to reply to this meeting invite and we'll route you to the appropriate person, which is Jen. Lovely to work with, but we're happy. She's always happy to meet with folks if you would like more information, or if you know someone who may be a great candidate for this advisory group. So I don't see any questions in the chat and don't see any hands raised. So I'm going to assume folks are okay for now. And if you have questions, again, if they come up later, feel free to raise your hand or drop it in the chat. So we will, I think we're moving ahead of time, which is always lovely, right? So I believe we will get to our next presenter. Speaking about flexible load, which is Jason Salmi Klotz. Again, this is our fearless leader, my manager. So he's going to get into what this is, a little one-on-one, as it's an introductory presentation, teeing up for our next month's learning lab. So, or our next learning lab, I should say. So I'm going to kick it over to you, Jason.
Thank you, Samantha. Hi, I'm Jason Salmi Klotz. I'm with our planning and strategy team at Portland General. Since we have a little bit of extra time, I think I'm going to take a little bit of a Socratic method here and see if we can't get some participation. I'll ask questions of the group. So I'm going to start a little bit higher up than what we have on the slides. The first question I have is, who here buys a product from a monopoly? Just raise your hand if you're buying a product from a monopoly. Okay, lots of hands, that's cool. Just about everybody's hand should be raised. Although in America, we believe in the open and free market, we do have monopolies. So does someone want to chime in and give us an example of a monopoly that they buy a product from? Nobody from
shy.
Go ahead, Samantha.
I was just saying, don't be shy.
Yeah.
And even if there's no wrong, like, again, this is a community of learning. So we do have a.
Well, I was saying license plate.
Buying a license plate from the state.
Yeah, from DMV. You can get that nowhere else.
Anyone else?
Utilities is what some other people put in the chat. I was thinking that as well.
I see hands raised. So we have Daniel and let me see what order, but Daniel and Anna. Maybe they just still have their hand raised. I was like, are they going to share?
Yeah,
sorry.
It's like I still did have my hand raised, but a monopoly, like, I don't know, any like shampoo products are probably just like a giant monopoly of some company that you buy at the store.
Okay.
Well, obviously, we don't have much choice in terms of what electrical utility we buy from.
That's right. Yeah, so it was somewhat of a self-serving and purposeful question. So electric utilities are monopolies. Natural gas utilities are also monopolies. Most of your utilities are regulated utilities, are monopolies. And what happened here is that long ago, the government, the federal government, state governments felt that electricity, energy, some forms of energy were an essential service that couldn't be, like, people could not go without. And so a kind of relationship was set in place where an entity would develop the electrical infrastructure and serve customers, and they would be given a license or a monopoly over a certain service territory. So PGE has a service territory, Pacific Core has a service territory, Seattle City Light has a service territory. And as a result, these companies are regulated. So what they can charge is regulated by the state. They have to be transparent in how they're earning money and what they're spending their money on, and how much debt they can take on, and what assets they can purchase. Those are just a few examples of how the utility is regulated. There are other things like internet that some people see as a monopoly, but theoretically there's choice in your internet service provider, and theoretically there's choice in your mobile phone provider as well. So they're not seen as monopolies, and therefore aren't regulated similarly to an essential service provider like an electric utility or a natural gas utility. So I have another question for everybody. We, the electric utility, we bill you in increments of kilowatt hours. And if you look at your bill, it'll show how many thousands of hours of kilowatts you have used at your home, and that's how we bill you at a certain rate. It's usually in cents, not in dollars per kilowatt hour. And I'm curious, what is, this is sort of a trick question, but what is the cheapest kilowatt?
Jason, can you maybe say what a kilowatt is, like kilo?
Oh, sorry. So it's just a measure of how much energy is being used or delivered, used by the customer, delivered to the home. It's 1,000 watts. So your, I don't know, your LED light bulb uses anywhere between 4 and 12 watts. And if your LED light bulb at 4 watts was running for an hour, it would have 4 kilowatt hours of usage. So I see Paul Hawkins and David Helslam, and is it Bayo? All have the correct answer to the question. The cheapest kilowatt is the one you don't have to purchase. And that goes not only for you, the customer, but also the utility and how the utility is structured. So when a utility serves customers, right, it has to buy and develop resources like wind turbines or natural gas plants or solar plants or batteries or hydro facilities, right? They might build these resources and own or partly own these resources in order to supply and develop energy that they bill customers at a kilowatt hour rate, right? So they build these resources and they bill us for the energy delivered. Well, the cheapest kilowatt is the one that the utility doesn't have to build. So everybody here, so we all take service from Portland General Electric or Pacific Core. Some of us might be in Eugene Water and Electric Board's service territory, or Salem Electric Cooperative, and there's a few others. around the state, smaller utilities, but we're all billed at a pretty much a flat rate. In other words, we buy every kilowatt at the same price for the most part, regardless of the time of day, regardless of how hot or cold it is outside, or regardless of what the market price at that moment happens to be for electricity. So utilities, if they don't own the resources to serve all of the demand on their system, sometimes called load, demand and load, we're going to use those synonymously. It's really just demand for electricity. If they don't have enough resources, they have to go to the open market where there's a host of entities looking to sell power output from their generators that they built either for their own purposes to serve their customers or to sell electricity into the market. And those prices fluctuate. They fluctuate from hour, day, season. And those prices, so the utility goes out and they purchase these the additional electricity, which they may not, have in their stack of resources, their portfolio of resources. So if they don't have it in their portfolio, they have to go to the market, purchase it in order to serve customers. And this often happens when the amount of demand for electricity is really high, like on a hot summer day, when everybody's cranking their air conditioning. And those prices for electricity can be high. Those prices are then folded into the utility's overall costs, which the commission helps regulate how those costs are passed along to customers. And they are generally passed along after the fact. They're incorporated into the company's costs, and they're passed along in the bill as a kind of a flat kilowatt hour rate. So there are a number of ways to manage this deficiency of resources, or now that we're moving toward a system where we have wind and solar as our primary greenhouse gas free carbonless resources as our main resources. And the trick here is that it used to be, so if we go to so I think it's slide 23, go to the next, yes, I think it's slide 23. So it used to be that utilities would, and we still do to an extent, we build these generators, right, way up in the system somewhere, generally far from the cities, and we generate power there, and we send the electricity down the transmission line, down the distribution system, and to the home, to the customer. And when the customer turned on a light switch or turned on the oven, the generator had to turn up as well to sort of balance the system. So the electricity system has to always be in balance at all times. Electricity is the only product that is consumed the instant it's created. I know that like Domino's Pizza probably wants to do the same business model, but they're just not quite there yet. I can't hear you laughing.
Feel free to use reactions too. You can.
Okay.
There you go.
Amazon too. Yes, that is correct. All right. So that system, was put in place nearly a century ago, where generators would chase the demand for electricity. They would go up or down depending upon how much demand for electricity or load was on the system, right? And that could change minute to minute, hour from hour. Now we're entering a new type of grid, and that creates a whole host of opportunities. It's a grid that has a two-way power flow, and it's a grid with a different mix of generators. renewable generators, for the most part, the fuel is not something that you can control, right? Only China controls the weather. And so only they have perfect forecasting of wind, but we don't, that's a joke. We don't control the wind and we don't control the sun. And so how the output of those generators, wind and solar, is typically up to how much fuel it's receiving, whether it's wind or solar. And we're now in a system where we need flexibility on both sides of the system. It used to be the flexibility came from the generator. The generator went up and down to chase the load, right? Or demand for electricity, and it kept it in balance. But now we have a system where we have we call them variable energy resources. It's another way of saying that wind and solar are kind of up and down in their output. And so in a two-way grid, there's an opportunity to move both the generation and the load in balance at the same time. And it's sort of like a seesaw, right? You're just trying to keep it in balance at all times. And this concept of having demand for electricity, or the load, be flexible, your usage of electricity being flexible enough to help us bring in, right, these variable energy resources like wind and solar, or to help address the high cost of energy when we have to go out and purchase it from third parties. And that is the general concept of flexible load, and it creates an opportunity here for customers as well. So it used to be that a customer, would purchase kilowatt hours or energy from us, but in a two-way system where you may have invested in things like a smart water heater or a smart thermostat or an electric car or rooftop solar or a battery for your home, or some other smart appliance, you could actually sell some of those energy services back to us. So we now have a two-way system. We're actually purchasing services from you, and you are purchasing services from us. And that's really what the concept of flex load is all about. It's a new type of system. It's a new balance. It's a new relationship with customers, and it's a new relationship with the utility. Are there any questions?
I don't see any in the chat or any hands raised, but I want to encourage folks, like, if it's not making sense or connecting, like, please, I want to encourage folks to say, hey, that doesn't make sense to me. Or it does. Hand is raised. Jen Hernandez.
Hi, just real quick, I was wondering how much like of the transmission lines belong to PGE, or is that something else that you also have to, you might have to use other transmission lines, I guess, if that makes sense.
No, it's a good question. Thank you. It's an insightful, sort of detailed question. So we don't own that much transmission. Bonneville Power Administration is the primary transmission owner for the entire Pacific Northwest. The Bonneville Power Administration is a large governmental agency that predates the Department of Energy. And they own most of the transmission in the region. Pacific Core also owns quite a bit of transmission in the region. And then there are other entities that own transmission. And if we don't own a transmission line, what we try to do is purchase transmission rights, or the right to transmit electricity across someone else's line in order to get the electricity from the point that it's generated to the point where it's needed. Does that help, Jen?
Yes, yes, it does. Thank
Okay,
you.
cool. Welcome. Any other questions? Are you guys just being Oregonians and like not saying anything?
We do have a question in the chat from Bayo.
Okay.
Is it flexible because electricity goes two ways and because there are multiple generators of electricity?
We say it's flexible, we say it's flexible load, so flexible demand. It's really flexibility on the customer's part, because it can, your usage of electricity can actually change. And you can change your patterns, and sometimes your smart appliances can actually change how they're using electricity without the service that you're getting from your appliance being interrupted. Let me give you an example. So you buy a hot water heater to get hot water. Well, you don't keep track of when your hot water heater elements turn on and off. Most of us don't, unless you're a really wonky engineer, and I've met a few who do actually do this sort of stuff. But you want hot water from your hot water heater. We, PGE, would like your hot water heater to maybe adjust how much electricity it is using during a particular hour or during a particular event. And if your water heater and the next door neighbor's water heater and their next door neighbor's water heater, the whole neighborhood's water heaters adjust just a little bit, that adds up. And that can help us bring on renewable generation. It can help us lower the cost to serve because we don't have to go out and purchase additional electricity to serve your water heater. You want hot water heater when you need it. And some of the smart water heaters that are out there right now actually learn when you're using hot water and will adjust how they heat the water tank. Hopefully that helps with a decent example. Okay, so let's see here. We have, so let's go to slide 26. So this is a classic example. This is not PGE or any of the utilities here in the Pacific Northwest, but typically a customer's demand sort of looks like this. It has two humps. You demand for electricity goes up in the morning. You've woken up, right? You want to heat or cool the house. You're heating or cooling your water. You've turned on all the lights in the house. Maybe you've plugged in your car. So the demand goes up in the morning, and then you go to work. Well, it used to be before COVID, many of us, almost all of us, were going to work at a different place, and so demand would lower. And then you return home, right? And you turn things on again, get ready for dinner. So this is typically what a household demand looks like, and this is part of how this sort of shape is what we take into when we're planning for what resources to make available the next day and when to turn them on and how much to ask for from them. Now that becomes a little bit different when it's just wind and solar. We do need some way of storing that energy. And so we've been looking into batteries. Lots of utilities are looking into batteries as a way to help fill the gap when wind and solar is not available. Hydro, we're blessed in the Pacific Northwest with hydro, which is, again, a type of energy storage. You're storing the water, which creates the energy. So it's a type of energy storage. Arguably, there are some community and environmental challenges associated with hydro. But I think almost all these resources have some sort of challenge associated with them. So if we go to the next slide. So when we talk about flex load and how we want to use load flexibility inside the system, these are pretty good examples of how that's done. And I just want to point out that the bottom left, conservation efficiency, energy efficiency is the first fuel. It is the first resource that a utility will design and build their system with. So it is cheaper, right, to not purchase that kilowatt hour, and the more efficient an appliance is, the less electricity you, and therefore the less resources the utility needs to build, and therefore the lower the overall bill of all customers would be. So conservation, in concept and by law, in the Pacific Northwest, is the first resource or the first fuel. Very important. I have lots of friends who come to me and say, should I put solar on my roof? And I always ask, do you have energy efficient appliances in your home? Because it's actually cheaper to do that before you put solar on your house. The electric vehicle is another energy efficient appliance, if you will, because it's much more energy efficient than an internal combustion engine. So one other type of flex load is how we call peak shaving, or what we call demand response. And I apologize for how that sounds. It sort of sounds like, hey, we demand and you respond, but it's an old term. It goes back to the 70s, before I was born. And it's supposed to mean it is a way to reduce the overall. So like what we said earlier, on hot summer days, people are using a lot of electricity, and the utility may have to go out and purchase costly electricity on the open market in order to fill the need for those few hours out of the year. One way to reduce the overall cost of that is to work with customers and their appliances or behavioral changes to reduce the overall demand during that hour, 2, 3, 4 hours. And just a little bit, like a half a kilowatt from every customer adds way up, because there's lots and lots of customers, and there's lots and lots of devices that could give us just a half a kilowatt. And and for the most part, the customers aren't inconvenienced. And in fact, the way we score our activities around the acquisition of demand response includes the customer's inconvenience. And so you can see here on this slide where we had a very hot summer day in August of 2021, and we called what's known as a demand response event. And so we asked customers and their devices to reduce how much electricity they were using by just a small amount. And that small amount from all the customers that participated, about 22% of PGE's customers participate in one of these programs. And we got about 64 megawatts of demand response. And I know that doesn't sound like a great deal, but it is a great deal, and it's extremely helpful. And you can visually see the change in our system when we called that event. when we ask customers to adjust just a little bit. And that makes a big difference in how much additional costs the utility might incur to otherwise provide energy along this, what would have been this top line if it was to play out, as opposed to this line that actually happened because we reduced the demand over those hours. And as if you participate in any one of these programs, we provide an incentive to compensate you for your participation.
So Jason, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
And we can send this out to our participants at the end. If folks didn't know about, we can give information on these programs. It's peak time rebate and demand response, correct?
Yeah, we have peak time rebate. Go back one slide, please.
Sorry, I just want to call that out because if folks want more information. Oh, Michelle Scala has her hands up, but we can send that out when we send out our presentation materials after this, which usually happens about a week out, but we can include information about those programs. Like Jason is saying, even a small amount of people participating, like that collectiveness, really can have a big impact. Michelle. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Sam. So I have kind of, I guess, a question / comment, but with regard to some of this, demand response, I know that certain households are, more engaged in energy limiting behaviors as it is, and it tends to be related to financial burden. And I feel like that also would kind of possibly, with the right amount of device use education type thing, cause them to engage in even more energy limiting behaviors in order to capture those additional savings. But so how does PGE kind of balance the benefits to the system of demand response and, the savings to the customer without inadvertently encouraging, negative energy limiting behaviors that come at the expense of health outcomes?
I'm not sure I entirely understand the question.
I guess all I'm trying to say is how do we make sure that the incentive to conserve isn't coming at the expense of the customer in non, I guess, financial ways? You know what I mean? How can we make sure that there's, folks aren't not turning on their AC, even though it's sweltering inside, but they want to be able to participate in some of these things?
Well, we communicate ahead of time, the day before an event, to let them know what the hours are. All the demand response or flex load programs are voluntary to participate both in the program over the season and by event. Some of our programs, when you enroll, you receive an incentive. Other programs like peak time rebate, we pay based on a performance from the household during those event hours, those event windows. So we do try to give them as much information as possible to make smart decisions about how to adjust their electricity usage. And through participation, they also learn at how much money they would save for their participation in events like that, or they save automatically by participating generally in the program. So they receive kind of a credit or a bill discount for their participation across the season. Does that help?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I understand the programs as is. I guess, without having necessarily the household level data in terms of what sort of interior temperatures certain households are rocking with or without demand response participation, it's kind of a hard question to answer. I guess if there's ever an opportunity to kind of understand that more deeply on kind of a social level, what is it that may be potential risks, I guess, of participation I don't even know if there would be some transparency that could be offered with the program, like, oh, remember, don't participate if it's going to compromise, your comfort in your home or something. I don't know. It's not a well-formulated thought, but I just would want to make sure that folks aren't, so driven by affordability issues, which are really potent right now, that they choose to engage in certain kind of like energy limiting behaviors that is kind of being encouraged through demand response, but at their own like personal expense. And by expense, I'm not referring to financial.
Michelle, I want to respond. It's Sam or Samantha. Yes, I would say we prioritize safety first. It is a personal choice. So even if you are enrolled in the program, if you do have like a smart thermostat, you can always have the full autonomy to override it and not participate. So I just wanted to add that because I think that's what you were talking about. We would never want someone to like compromise their health, comfort, safety. So they can call it. And like you said, we try to give it an advance notice. But if you're like, no, it's too hot, I can't do it, you don't have to participate, right, Jason? Like folks have the ability.
Yep, people have the ability to not
Okay.
participate, and the incentives here are not so great as to induce people to go without. It's not going to erase your bill. It's going to help with a few dollars over the course of the month.
Right. Well, I mean, I would just caution as far as like perspective in terms of those few dollars, right? Because that might be particularly profound for certain households. And then even to the extent where it's participatory, and I don't want this whole conversation to imply that I'm not supportive of demand response. I definitely am sensitive to its advantages and benefits. But, one of the things that we had learned in other spaces was this kind of crisis mode mentality that households who are chronically financially burdened are in. And that can actually cause, decision-making burnout when it comes to these kind of things. And it becomes this, fight or flight or last ditch effort kind of thing to grab onto whatever kind of savings you have. And so if somebody is just a few dollars short on rent or medication or whatever it might be, then these decisions, whether participatory or not, may come at their own expense. And I know that the utility, it's not like a, public assistance institution and stuff like that. But I think that to me, maybe one of the low-hanging fruit that we can pick in this conversation is just to make sure that folks are thoroughly educated on, negative health outcomes associated with certain energy limiting behavior, and to kind of distinguish what you're trying to go for with demand response versus, affordability issues.
Okay, that's certainly something that we can start evaluating through our evaluations that we conduct for each of these programs and supply each year to the commission and to stakeholders. So it's something that we could add to the evaluation so that you have and we have better data on that. You're welcome.
We have a couple questions in the chat, Jason.
Yeah, I'm kind of looking. So what would happen if those 22% of people on that evening never decided to decrease their demand? If they decided not, so if everybody coincidentally decided not to respond, then PGE would acquire the electricity and to serve the demand. So it's like the counterfactual. We would. So if we go back to that slide that had the demand response, the 64, I think it's slide 31. So you can see that this top red line has a different trajectory. We would procure the electricity necessary to serve at that trajectory. We have a mandate to serve, and we will go out and procure the electricity necessary to serve all hours of the year. So how do you determine the dollar value assigned to the kilowatt not consumed by a customer during a DR event? That's a really good question. And it's a bit complex and slightly yeah, difficult to communicate, but we PGE, the Public Utility Commission, and Energy Trust of Oregon, we use a calculator called cost effectiveness calculator or methodology, which helps us determine whether or not an investment in things like energy efficiency, demand response, smart car chargers or batteries is cheaper to purchase from customers at a certain price than it would be to buy that resource or build that resource. And that calculator is pretty complex, and it takes into account the costs and benefits associated with the deployment and build of an energy efficiency program or a demand response program. You know, how much administration is there? How do you incent the customer to purchase? What is the install cost? And then how do you bring that resource into your utility operations so you can talk to it? So there's all these infrastructure that goes about in developing these things. And what we try to do at both the Energy Trust and PGE is make sure that we're supplying an incentive that induces the right response and that is fair and reflects the value of the service to the system. If that makes sense. So there is a concept, and it is just a concept, called real-time pricing, where theoretically a utility could charge customers the actual real-time price of electricity throughout the day, and vice versa, purchase electricity or services from the customer at that real-time price. That is a very difficult concept to put into place, and I'm not sure that anybody's prepared for that. But in general, what we try to do is take a look at, so for a demand response event, generally what the price of electricity would be at those peak hours, those few hours out of the year where demand is really high and energy might be scarce in the region. So what is that price? And we try to average that out and use that as our guide to what we would pay the customer for their participation. Does that help? Okay, cool. Thank you. Since it is so energy burden. So is it Anjanette? Is that how you say it? So yes, okay, thank you. So yes, it's an essential service, right? And we do have an income qualified bill discount program. PacifiCorp has one as well. Idaho Power has one as well. And that is pretty close to a kind of assessment of the burden on a low-income family faces due to energy costs. And we try to factor that into how that rate is developed. And we've been working with the commission staff on what the percentage reduction should be. And, we are looking into other ways to help serve low income needs, whether that's through the income qualified bill discount, or whether that is through how we offer programs like smart thermostats or water heaters or energy efficiency to low income customers by providing a greater incentive to them to participate, or helping them with a greater share of the cost of the appliance, or perhaps in some cases the full cost of that smart appliance. So we are working with the community and with the commission on how best to design these efforts so that we can get greater participation from low income customers. Just to go back to something Michelle was asking, we have a project called the Smart Grid Testbed here at PGE, and we began that in 2018. And it's a small grouping of about 20,000 of our customers in 3 sites in our service territory: Milwaukee, Hillsborough, and Portland. And when we were designing that program or that activity, we wanted really high participation so that we could get better information on what was the customer value proposition. Why would a customer participate in these crazy ideas? And what motivates them to do it? And so in order to get better data on that, we worked with the commission, we worked with Oregon Department of Energy, we worked with the Citizens Utility Board on how to get a big group of participants of these 20,000. And we talked about something called a opt-out rate. In other words, everybody was part of this program and they could opt out. And what we originally put on the table was something called an opt-out time of use rate. And so if you go to slide 30, the idea here is that when throughout the day, what you pay for energy would change, whether you were using energy off peak, like at night, or on peak in the middle of a hot summer day, right? Or at mid peak, which is sort of the other parts of the day which are not on peak or off peak is considered mid peak. And so your rate is different depending upon the hours of the day. And this is a way to save money if you are conscious about when you're using electricity. So instead of plugging your car in to charge or turning the clothes dryer on during on-peak hours, 5 to 8 a.m., 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. in the summer, you could plug your car in or turn the clothes dryer on off-peak at night. And that way you would save money. So for the Smart Grid Testbed, we initially said, okay, so what about putting people on all the participants, all the customers in the Smart Grid Testbed, those 20,000 customers, we put on a time of use rate. And Bob Jenks and the Citizens Utility Board raised their hand and they said, well, we don't think that's fair, especially to low income customers. People need an option. And so that's where, for the Smart Grid Testbed, 20,000 of our customers were placed on peak time rebate. So with our peak time rebate program, and customers can opt in. They can decide to participate or not participate in an event, and we let them know a day ahead of time that an event is coming and what the hours are and how they could participate, whether it's to turn down their thermostat a degree or two, or turn off a few lights, right? Or not take that shower during those hours. And it's up to the customer to participate. And CUB felt that was better for low income customers who may not have the flexibility to adjust to a time of use rate, or may not have the opportunity to respond to a peak time rebate. So let's go to slide 32. Okay, so earlier in the discussion, and I'll be fairly quick because I'm a little over time. Earlier in discussion, we talked about how the system is now a two-way system. because in the past, we had just a smaller clutch of large generators that chased demand or chased load. But now we have a two-way system. The intelligence and operational complexity of trying to connect to thousands of thermostats and thousands of water heaters and what might be in the future thousands of cars and trucks and maybe even batteries that people have purchased and put in their homes, or maybe their car is acting as a battery for their home, or solar rooftops. All of these resources have to be coordinated on the system in order to get the whole system in balance. So it used to be just a few resources way out, right, in the country. Now it's thousands of resources down deep into the distribution system. And the orchestration and utilization of all those resources is what we call a virtual power plant. So if you take all the water heaters and thermostats and electric cars and solar rooftops and you aggregate them together, they can operate like a large generator, and we call that a virtual power plant. And so that orchestration, that collective intelligence is housed in our operations department as part of our virtual power plant. And the capabilities of that virtual power plant are maturing as the technology matures and as the proliferation and number of these flexible resources materialize throughout our system. Any questions about that? Okay, maybe I'm just a nerd, but I thought that there might be some questions because I thought that was pretty cool. But so Bayo has a question here in the chat. So the income qualified bill discount, that's a fairly new program. I don't know that there are actually reserved dollars for that. But if it's, I can try to track that down for you if you'd like to find out if there's like a reservation system. I don't think that there is. I think because it is new as it is, what we're trying to do is identify, well, how many customers really do need this assistance, and what is the total cost of that, and then the commission will help us manage how those costs are recovered. Okay, great, thank you.
Michelle has her hand up.
Yes, Michelle.
Hey, sorry, I just wanted to offer Bayo really quickly that, we have approved an automatic adjustment clause for PGE with the income qualified bill discount program. So the way that works is the company forecasts the expected costs for the program year, and then they do a cost allocation that the commission has to approve. So like what customer classes pay what amount of the total forecasted costs, and then that becomes like a little percentage add to everyone's bill. And then those funds will ultimately go to pay for the discounts. And then any discrepancies are, either refunded or adjusted in the little tariff rider at the end of the year.
Thanks, Michelle.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, if you guys have any additional questions, that pop up in your head, please reach out, let me know. And if it sounded like I was speaking a foreign language today that no one understood, please let Samantha know so that I can adjust if I have to present some other time. Otherwise, thanks for the time. I appreciate it. Here's some next steps. We do have an advisory committee meeting on our multi-year plan coming up on July 27th as part of our learning labs. And then we'll be submitting later in the year our flexible load multi-year plan. This is a budget for all of our demand response flex load program activity that we conduct. And if you're really interested in the details of how all of these programs function, operate, funded, that is all in our filing, our 2021 multi-year plan filing, as all of those details. And if you're looking for it, it's in docket UM 2141. You can read through that 300-page monster. So we're going to have a discussion with our commission staff here in a little bit about what the multi-year plan for submittal will look like for this year. There was some concern on staff side that it's a very big report and there's a lot to go through, and we would all like to see if there's ways to reduce the amount of lift and detail associated with that, while supplying the necessary information for people to feel informed and the commission make a decision. And we'll also be talking about our programs, costs and benefits, and cost effectiveness, which is something I touched on today. It is a very complex methodology which is used throughout the country in almost every jurisdiction to determine, what is the proper price to pay for things like flex load and demand response and energy efficiency. Okay, if nothing else, I'll say thank you and let you guys move on.
Thank you so much, Jason. I really appreciate all the questions and engagement. That is what the learning labs are about. So if you have questions later, maybe the virtual power plant, I understand what Jason's saying. It's kind of a new concept. And I think folks maybe need either more on the virtual power plant, maybe some real life examples and what it means for us. I think it's pretty cool, but it's new-ish. So I don't think that's anything on you, Jason. I think folks just need to learn more about it and see some real life examples and what it's going to look like. So maybe we'll revisit that in a future learning lab. Maybe we'll have a segment more on the virtual power plant as we are moving in that direction. Again, if you do have questions that pop up after, feel free to reach out to us at the learning labs at pgn.com. I can definitely get you to the right folks. And if you have any follow-ups, we're always available to meet with you one-on-one or set up a meeting. So I know that was a lot of information. So I'm now going to pass it over to Nahit Shah, who works on our integrated resource planning team. These are our office hours we're holding. If folks want to ask questions about our clean energy plan / integrated resource plan that we filed back in March. So this is just kind of a free form, right, Nahit? And do you want to provide any updates, if there are any, about the filing as we're in the comment period?
Yeah, happy to provide that. Thanks, Samantha. So yeah, this is free form. Happy to answer as many questions as I can. If there are questions that I cannot answer today, I'm happy to work with my colleagues at PGE and provide the answers when I can. For those of you that may not be aware, PGE has filed responses to round 0 comments, and those responses are also available under the LC80 docket on the OPUC's website. Yeah, and I am happy to take any questions starting here.
And it may be that some folks have not been following the CEP IRP. do you want to just give like a brief, like what it is?
Yeah, sorry. That's good to know. I think it's kind of hard to transition. So for those of you that may not be aware, the role of the IRP or the integrated resource plan is essentially to first understand as a function of how electricity need is growing in the future. So that could be because, you know, we're going to have more load growth because of new homes and new buildings and you know, data centers and manufacturing and all of that. As a function of that, including electrification and things like that, as a function of that load growth increase, what is the need on our system? So what combination of how much resource do we need essentially? And then tries to answer the question of what combination of resources would help meet that need in a manner that complies with different policy objectives, right? So we want to try and make sure we are building resources, but not building too many resources. So trying to make sure we are optimizing for least cost. We also want to try and optimize for least risk. We also want to make sure we are accounting for community benefits, accounting for emissions reductions. And so we use all of that together to determine what our final sort of recommended preferred portfolio is, which essentially provides an example of how we could meet the resource needs of the future. And so that's kind of the primary goal of the IRP. And the CEP sort of adds layers on that. And I've kind of mentioned a couple of those layers, like emissions reductions and community benefits. So I think there might be more familiarity with the CEP in this group, but Samantha, happy for you to add any more information there, or if you think anything else needs to be talked about.
Sure. And when you say resources or our portfolio mix, you're speaking of like hydro, wind, solar.
Yeah.
Just for the level set, but
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, resource in essence is anything that you know, helps meet our need, right? And so in this case, our need is essentially energy or capacity. Energy is kind of, as you think about it, it's sort of the amount of energy we use on sort of a day-to-day basis. Capacity is associated with the energy that we use during peak periods, if you want to think about that on a more simplistic level. And resources essentially are technologies that can help address those needs. So they can either provide energy on a day-to-day basis, or they specialize in providing energy during peak periods, right? So this could be anything from your electric vehicle that is charging at a time where it doesn't require peak power, or rooftop solar, or offshore wind, nuclear, hydropower, you know, and any of that would classify as a resource.
thanks, Naheed. So again, we just wanted to provide a little level setting because this is a more expanded and newer group. So some may have not been following our Clean Energy Plan / IRP Integrated Resource Plan filing. So this would just be the time, if you have reviewed that very large document or parts of it, this will be the time to ask questions. And oh, great, I see we have a hand up for Jen Hernandez.
Hi again. So just apologies if this was if any of my questions actually were you know, talked about in the CEP. It is a very large document, so maybe I just didn't get to everything or I missed something. But my very first question actually was, how much of your goals, you know, do you have like a rough percentage, or how much do you plan to use what's it called, RECs to really meet your goals actually when it comes to you know, lowering emission levels? Like, do you have an idea, like yeah, like what's going on with RECs and PGE?
Yeah, so recs do not feature as a compliance mechanism. So the overarching policy is an emissions-based policy. So we have to meet emissions targets, right? And so we cannot use recs to meet emissions targets. So we would have to, for our retail service, ensure our maximum emission is within the target set by HB 2021. So recs do not feature as a strategy to meet compliance with HB 2021. Does that answer your question?
Sorry, I was just looking for, in this document I just had open, because the reason why I asked that actually just confused me even more. Because you have here, if I can find this, HB 2021 did not define progress as actual annual emissions reductions. So if you're saying it's not that, then what is it based on?
I'm sorry, where in the document are you seeing that it's not based on emissions?
Page 91. It could be, again, I did not maybe read as carefully. This is the only thing I've just, that stood out to me, as, we were going through everything. If you're saying that it is based more like, emissions reductions, but then it says here HB 21 did not define progress as actual annual emissions reductions. Is there something I'm misunderstanding?
Yeah. So just to get into the details. So between today or the first year in which we can take action, which in this case is 2026 and 2030, HB 2021 does not tell us how to go from 2026 to 2030. So PGE tried to figure out what would be the best way to do that, right? Is that reducing sort of the same amount of emissions each year, that is a linear reduction, or do you sort of front load the emissions by trying to procure several resources ahead of time and then kind of ease into 2030, or do you try to procure resources much later and risk potential non-compliance, but maybe have access to cheaper resources, right? So it is that timing between 2026 and 2030 that isn't defined by HB 2021. And it is that portion, 2026 to 2030, and the reduction therein that is being discussed in that section. So it is, again, emissions-based without a target from HB 2021, but with the language that it should be sort of consistent, continual progress, sorry. And so it is still emissions-based, but the target is not set. So we are trying to determine what is the best target in that interim. And the same thing kind of applies even, say 2032, when there isn't a goal necessarily, there isn't a path necessarily between 2030 and 2035, except continual progress.
That makes sense. Okay. So I should spend more time on this. And I guess this is just based on another meeting. At the last PUC meeting, someone from PGE had mentioned that it was kind of hard to meet some targets this past year because of a lot of unaccounted variables, including, climate, fluctuations are even more extreme and stuff like that. So how is PGE, I guess, assessing as, climate gets more, harder to predict, for especially these next 20 years or so? How is PGE, I guess, gosh, my words, like looking ahead for, and accounting for those kind of very unstable variables, which, in this case, I'm just using climate, but it could be anything really that PGE had come up with as well, with COVID and everything going up and things like that. How is PGE going to handle that now after this year?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And Jen, I'm going to try and break the question out into two pieces. And I think that the nuance between the two pieces is really important. So there's a question about compliance with HB 2021. And then there is a question about how the system handles extreme sort of scenarios, right? So let's imagine, the worst possible year when it comes to like electricity prices, right? So there is very low hydro conditions, there is, high natural gas prices. There is very low wind on the system throughout the year on average. There is relatively high cloud cover, and there's very low solar generation, right? So these are all ways in which our assets are essentially performing lower than the level that they would usually perform at compared to an average year or an expected performance, right? So the question about compliance is a slightly tricky one, right? So what does it mean to be compliant when all of these factors go wrong? Are you still required to be 80%? Are you still supposed to have like 80% reduction in emissions, even in a year that is this bad? And if we start to do that, are we then planning for a system that could potentially be really bad? And we would have to have, a significant amount of resources to try and make sure that that system is able to provide 80% reduction. And what I'm trying to get at here is that there is a balance somewhere, right? So like you want the system to be compliant with emission targets, but at the same time, it can't be compliant with emissions targets under every possible circumstance in every possible future, right? And therefore, we need to draw a line somewhere. And the way the PUC has drawn the line is that we want to be compliant on an expected year basis, right? So we think something is going to happen, and when I say we think something is going to happen, I'll get into what that really means. But essentially, we have an expectation. We have an expectation of warming. We have an expectation of forced outages. We have expectations of prices changing, of wind patterns, and so on and so forth. But on an expected basis, so what we think, would be sort of a relatively normal year in 2028, given all the realities that are there today with climate change and how we have been forecasting them, we expect the system to be compliant with HB 2021. But now come 2028 and we have 3 heat domes in the year, I think it would be unreasonable to assume that that system would still be compliant with HB 2021 at the same levels, right? So that is the compliance side of your question. The other side, which is how does PG ensure that it can manage, those worst situations? And the way we do that is through probabilistic planning. So we have a model that is called a resource adequacy model. The goal of that model is essentially to come up with 50,000 different potential we call them games, but essentially situations for each year that take different combinations of weather, hydro conditions, wind generation, solar generation, fuel outages, and things like that. So we put them all together, and we have these 50,000 combinations, and we try to make sure that amongst all these possible outcomes, that we are meeting a standard of 1 in 10 years, right? And as data comes in, the entire distribution becomes a little sort of worse, if that makes sense. So what's happening is the data of 2021 is included in the model. So now the heat dome is part of several of those simulations. And so the reliability requirement is going up a little more because heat domes are in parts of several simulations. Similarly, 2022 had quite a terrible winter, including start of 2023. And once that data is included, it would again shift the reliability a little higher. So it would essentially be setting a higher and higher standard as the data kind of comes in. And so that is how we ensure that the system will be adequate. But we cannot necessarily say that the system, will be adequate up to a certain standard. But that doesn't mean that in every possible outcome, even if the system is adequate, it will be compliant with HB 2021. So it's compliant on an expected basis, but it has a much higher reliability standard. And so the difference between the two is essentially a sort of risk we are all collectively willing to take. That we cannot like overbuild the system every single time. And so how do we balance overbuilding the system to make sure that we are meeting our emissions requirements, but at the same time doing so in a manner that like makes sure costs are not going up as significantly, right? And so that's the balance that the OPUC staff struck during the UM 2225 development, and that's how we've set up our modeling. Does that answer your question?
Actually, yes, and I really appreciate that you were able to identify, the difference between compliance with HB 2021 and obviously this, separate issue of, what to do in these situations. And it does, I do like that you mentioned that, as every year goes by, you added data based on like, how certain seasons have gone. I think that works really well. So I don't know, I haven't read this, but I'm assuming then, because you're right, I completely agree. We can't over build for everything. It can't be like dependent, on like weather and climate. And I totally get that, and I actually agree. So is there like I guess plans for what to do when like certain areas tend to be more vulnerable, like are there already like contingency plans in case historically underrepresented, maybe areas, example here in Portland, will get hit, harder than others. I'm just wondering if that's taken into account, or if that's like another area that would talk about that.
Yeah, that's another really good question. So we do want to think about the system and like at sort of the right granularity, right? Like if I'm going to take an analogy of sort of the human body, you're thinking about a specific organ, but the IRP is planning for the entire system, so the entire body. So you're thinking about like preventative health care for like the entire body versus preventative health care for like the liver, right? And so what I'm trying to get at here is that outages related to generation systems going down have actually not been very common. So I think one of the last big ones was in 2001, and I don't know if there has been a really big one after that. But what is happening is that you see distribution level outages, whether that's from trees falling, people driving into poles, whether it is lines that need replacing, or other like equipment failures and things like that. So those happen at a different level. So if I'm trying to be limited to my box, I would say that is not a problem we address in the CBIAG. But thinking about the entire system, this would be an issue that could be addressed by a distribution system plan, right? Because that would ensure that the folks in that area have adequate connections, or they have equipment that prevents the failures, or they have technology that can help restore the outages faster. But they're not necessarily associated with a lack of generation, right? So it's not like we didn't have enough hydropower, and that's why this neighborhood got out, had a power outage. If we didn't have enough hydropower, the entire region would see its effects, not a single neighborhood. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, thank you. That's all I was able to think about just in this brief time. So thank you for answering my questions. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Thanks, Jen. And yes, it is a hefty document, so I don't expect people to go through it with a fine tooth comb, but some do. I know we're at time, so I just want to honor everyone's time. We're a little bit past. We do have a question in the chat, but if folks from PGE want to stay after a few minutes to answer more questions, we have a question in the chat from Charles, but Shadia, can we just move to the next step, and then we can back up if folks want to stay on for the office hours for a few additional minutes. So and then we'll go back. So I want to thank everyone who's here. We are recording this meeting. So if you have to jet out now, that's fine. And you can go back to the recording to get this last few minutes for our office hours for the Clean Energy Plan and Integrated Resource Plan. But we always like to follow up with our next steps. So next June 15th, that's today, at 3:30 to 5, there's a PGE and Transportation Electrification Workshop with the Oregon Public Utility Commission. So if you are feeling like you want to engage even more in more meetings, feel free to use that link or head to their site on June 20th from 3 to 4. And on June 26th, we will have office hours for the transportation electrification draft filing. So that's from 1 to 2. We will follow up in an email with all this. June 21st, July 5th, July 19th, 3 to 4. We will have more office hours to discuss things like today, like we were just a moment ago. June 28th, 10 to 12. That is the CBIAG meeting, which Jen Latu leads. If you want to observe in that space. And then July 27th, we have our next learning lab from 10 to 12, which will be talking about the flex load, a little more deep dive. And we will be sending out meeting materials post this meeting. You can find more information about past meetings and materials on our website or webpage. For more information, if you have questions, you can email us at learninglab@pgn.com. We've changed a lot of our mailboxes, but this is the one for now. And please continue to participate. So we hope to see you next month and participate in our submitting comments for LC 80 and the transportation electrification. There will be links there. I also want to take one moment because I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that it's Pride Month. June is full with a lot of celebrations and acknowledgements. So I want to acknowledge and recognize that and say Happy Pride Month to everyone out there. It's also Black Music Month. It's also Caribbean Heritage Month. And what's coming up on Monday, it's Juneteenth to commemorate the emancipation of Black American slaves. PGE will be out at the Portland Juneteenth celebration at Lillis Albina. So if you want to engage and have fun in the community and learn more about Juneteenth, please come out and see us. We will be there, and it's a really fun event. So that will be at Lillis Albina Park on Saturday and Sunday. I believe Saturday hours 12 p.m. to 7, and on Saturday 12 to 6 p.m. PGE will be there on Saturday only, but we will be out in the community. So please feel free to swing by. We could go back to the office hours, but I want to thank everybody who has to drop right now. John, if you're still on, we can ask your question to Nahit, but I want to thank everyone for participating. We appreciate the dialogue, the questions, and this is what the Learning Labs are about. So we hope to see you all next time, and thank you. Okay, Nahit, are you still there?
I am.
So, and just for the sake, because we are recording this, so John Charles asked, one problem with building out, and maybe this was addressed, but with Jen, one problem with building out a system based so heavily on weather-dependent resources is overproduction at certain times. Can you explain how the curtailment works when that happens in terms of money? Who pays and who benefits? Also, who determines what resources get curtailed?
Yeah, this is a really good question, and it's going to take a few minutes to get through all elements here. And I'm happy to dive into it. Just to confirm, John is still on the call, yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so yes, you are absolutely right that building a system that is overly weather dependent will lead to overproduction, which leads to curtailment. So let's just talk about curtailment for just a moment, and then we can touch on the different elements. So curtailment essentially means that there is an oversupply relative to the demand. So you think about this moment right now on the grid, it's June 15th at 12:10 p.m. And let's assume, all the wind was blowing and all the solar was producing at the maximum capacity factor it possibly could. And we had excess generation than we had expected. We would essentially not be able to use all that generation because we don't have the demand, and we try to balance the grid instantaneously. In cases where we can either charge something or reserve something, we do that first, right? So if there is a battery to be charged, that kind of happens. Operators will try to do that at times like these, for sure. Hydropower, where it's not run of the river, more like pump storage, they would try to take advantage right now. And the hope is sometime in the future that if there's hydrogen production, moments like these where there's curtailment could be used to also produce hydrogen as a way to make sure that we are not, in a sense, having these resources, the energy produced from these resources wasted. All right. So in terms of money, who pays and who benefits? So who pays? So everyone pays, every PGE ratepayer that is helping fund, the next wind plant. Let's just say it's sort of the next Wheatridge, and it's a day where Wheatridge is being curtailed. The cost is already being borne by customers through rates. And in terms of who benefits, when there is curtailment, if we are unable to use that energy, nobody gets a monetary benefit from that. But that said, curtailment isn't necessarily a bad thing all the time. There's some degree of curtailment. So let's say you have 8,760 hours in the year. If you're curtailing for 10 hours, but you're able to get significant production for the rest of the year, it might be worth it, right? So there is a balance. And so we shouldn't look at it as a negative thing that like we need to eliminate altogether. We need to look at the larger picture and determine what happens. Okay. In the other question is who determines what resources get curtailed? So in terms of resources getting curtailed, this is a really interesting question. Let's assume that we had all resources kind of generating at their maximum amount. Resources with variable costs would try to curtail first, right? So think of your natural gas power plant. They have variable costs of like buying the fuel. So they will try to reduce their production first as soon as they see that generation is meeting load and they can't like sell any further. After that, it becomes a question of like which resource would best match the system needs in that moment and in the moments in the future. And so that is kind of dependent on the operator, and the operators would determine whether it would make sense to curtail solar or wind or both, and it would be based on total system cost. So the goal is to reduce total system cost, and they would curtail in a manner that ensures we are reducing total system cost. Does that answer your question, John? All right. While John responds to that, I will mention one thing as a way to avoid overly weather-dependent resources, or at least resources that are dependent on the same weather patterns. So, for example, having all resources in the wind, all resources in the gorge, all wind resources in the gorge. There is a need to think about transmission to different to different regions that have different weather patterns, right? And so the grid is throughout the West, right? The entire West is one grid. And so the grid is larger than any single weather system. And it makes sense if you want to think about it very holistically, to try and take advantage of the fact that the grid is actually bigger than any single weather system in a given area. And how we use that to benefit our customers in a way that like produces a least cost system that is reliable, I think is the question that we try to answer in the IRP, right? And so we show that if there is transmission available to different regions, such as Nevada or Wyoming, they do help reduce system costs, especially in the long term, because of their diverse weather patterns, right? And so while these opportunities exist, it is on all of us as we go through sort of the acknowledgement process and things like that, as we go through comments, to determine if that is something that we are willing to do and willing to work towards. And so while there is curtailment and that side of the equation, there are opportunities that exist through transmission expansion that can help minimize some of that while providing significant benefits, which I will also admit is definitely expensive, but as our modeling has shown, it is relatively cheaper in the long term.
Okay, well, thanks folks for sticking around. We do have another office hour, which will be coming up, I can't remember, I gotta look at the thing, June 21st. So if you have more questions about the IRP and CEP filing, feel free to come in on our office hours. We have several of them. It'll be June 21st again, July 5th and July 19th, and they will be from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. I want to thank everyone for staying a little bit after. If you're watching this on our recording, again, feel free to email us at learninglabs@pgn.com if you have questions. And again, thanks so much for joining us.